Welcome to Ausfilm Creatives, a podcast about Australian creatives working behind the camera. My name is Peter Sylvester and I'm your host. I've got Abraham Joffe, ACS, with me here. If you haven't seen Tales by Light on Netflix, 2 seasons of that on there, amazing piece of documentary filmmaking. So yeah, I just want to have a chat to him about his experience as a cinematographer, doing his own project. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pete. Really good to be here.
I like to get to know people as far as where did they come from? Like, what's your background? How you got into it?
Yeah, I guess for me, my love of the outside world and storytelling and just the real life subject matter sort of came about from having an incredible childhood where I actually got to travel Australia for 3 years with my family. It's a very unusual upbringing, which not a lot of people have, that sort of childhood. And those 3 years, those real formative years when I was sort of a young teen, my family just travelled around Australia. My parents were writing books on Australian characters, so I got to meet all these interesting explorers, scientists, crocodile farm owners, and all these different people all around Australia for 3 years. And so that introduction to the big world sort of began for me, before a lot of people had that. A lot of people wait till they finish school and then maybe do the gap year, travel Europe, start to see the world. But I was sort of travelling full time as a teenager, and that was, I think, a massive head start for working out what sort of direction I wanted to take in life. And I just knew I loved life and loved the real world. And at the same time, I was running around with a camera. Mum had a camcorder and, we'd shoot home movies and things. And so filming and combining that with nature started really early for me. And then the other big influence, which some people have heard me say before, but Malcolm Douglas, who was the original crocodile hunter, the first man really to do films about the Australian outback back in the 1960s. He was a bit of a legend on the world around us. I used to grow up watching him, and I got to meet him in Broome with his crocodile farm and his dog Bindi, and we stayed there for a few weeks and got to go out and see him filming. And then for the next few years, I would sort of, as I got more and more interested in documentary and this sort of thing, I kept sending him little short tapes and things I'd done, and kept asking him when I was going to work for him, and he'd always write letters back. And by the time I hit 18, he actually was in Sydney cutting a new series, which actually turned out sadly to be his last series, but before he was tragically killed in the early 2000s. But I got to edit for him. I was 18 and I was actually in North Sydney TAFE doing a film and TV course and was doing some edits for the episodes, and then he asked me to come and be his cameraman for a few months up in Broome. And so at 18, it was my first job, and I was off filming fishing stories and camping stories and cooking. He used to do a lot of bush tucker, and so that was amazing to get that opportunity so early. And that was in 2001. So that was sort of, I'd say that was the beginning of it all. And then since then, I guess it's been a sort of interesting route to where I am today. I got back to Sydney, did a couple of years working for a fellow called David Ireland, who was another crocodile hunter-esque wildlife personality, and I got to go. He loved the fact that I'd worked for Malcolm Douglas, so it was sort of a shoe-in there. And we went to places like Solomon Islands, Christmas Island, East Timor, all across the Northern Territory, shooting sort of wildlife encounter films. And in between those projects, started to do a little bit of corporate work, started to shoot a few weddings. Those things, I guess I was very keen to move out of house and sort of try to get myself financially set up. And like a lot of people, those jobs came very easily and they paid well, and it sort of did take my focus for quite a few years. So that took my focus for quite a few years, but about 6-7 years ago, I sort of started to refocus myself on what I really wanted to do and get back to the wildlife stuff. So it was sort of come a little bit of a full circle. But life's about timing, and I think everything I've done has all they've all been great learning experiences. Running a business has been in the corporate world, wedding world was there was a lot of things learnt there, a lot of life experiences. And I think the timing for me to get back and do what I really loved was the right time a bit later on.
Listening to that, as far as cinematography and nature for you are sort of one of the same almost by the sound of it. It's sort of a merged thing of capturing the images of nature to try to show the importance of it, I guess. Is that what made you be a cinematographer?
Yeah, I probably the love of the subject matter came first, but then I just loved, I loved the craft of capturing things, sharing things. I think I'm a natural collector as well. I'm just collecting is in my blood. I used to collect coins and, stamps and all those things as a kid. And I think, shooting documentaries and wildlife is collecting in its own way. You're collecting shots. You're trying to get the one you don't have, and sort of that probably sort of bleeds on into it today. But I think also, I always think of cinematography, wildlife doco stuff is a little bit like journalism, that you can touch almost any subject matter that you want. Filmmaking in general. If you're passionate about cars and you love either photography or filmmaking, you can be a car specialist and work in that field. If you love fashion, you can be a fashion photographer or a fashion filmmaker. Wildlife, underwater. And there's very few professions, except possibly writing journalism. I think you could probably attach that to any one particular subject. But I think that's great, and it's really interesting when you meet people who are niche in their field. Especially some of that extreme sport stuff. Filmmakers, rock climbers who are filmmakers, and often the best filmmakers, like the snowboarding docos that you see, they're often ex-snowboarders that got injured and then they become the DPs, and no one can compete with their particular skill set because of their background and that combination. And for me, I was very fortunate that I started scuba diving when I was 12 years old, so I've got over 20 years of diving experience. So why not? When the opportunity to film it was natural, of course, take a camera underwater, and that's a whole new world in itself. And I love the underwater world. And I think above all, I just love the variety that the work I'm currently doing gives me. It's just, I have a lot of respect for people who can, just film the big cats all year round. And I love filming big cats in Africa, and we've just got a show coming out. But I do, I think I've got the best of both worlds, where I can go and spend a couple of months there and then, be in Antarctica or, other parts of the world doing underwater work or other things. And just that variety is, fantastic to keep your creative juices flowing, and you get to see a lot more of the world as well, I guess.
You touched on the transition from obviously doing the business side of video production to try to, get the cash flow going. What was there some moment that you really saw that this was the opportunity now to change and do exactly what you wanted to do? Was it purely a financial choice, or was it actually an opportunity that came along and you went, there's no way I can miss it?
Yeah, there was probably a couple in the second half, the last several years, where things have really ramped up and we started making our own productions. I think I had never been to Africa, and in 2012, the opportunity to go to Africa arose through a friend of a friend, which often happens, that was running a safari company, and they wanted it documented, and so I jumped at the opportunity. It was a non-paying job, but it was, it got me to Africa. And it was a 1-month shoot across Botswana, South Africa, and then Namibia. And that particular, I think that 1-month African trip was definitely a wake-up call to get back to what I loved doing. And it sort of coincided a little bit with some work with Canon. So we'd started doing a little bit more work with Canon that came off the back of doing just an experimental film about taking stills from video. I don't know if you remember that. It was, when the 1DC came out and we started pulling photos, and, we shot something that was off our own back. It wasn't an authorized, piece of content from Canon, but they loved, I guess they loved the initiative of that piece, and then started doing some more commercial work for them. And the big break, I think, was they wanted to produce some content on each of their Canon masters. And one of those masters was Darren Dew, the underwater photographer. And the original idea was just to film interviews in a studio with each Canon master and profile their work, have some photographs that would be overlaid on the interview, talking about some of their most memorable images, pretty simple standard stuff. And I had met Darren a couple of times before, and when the opportunity came up, I just rang him and he agreed, why don't we go to Tonga and film him swimming with humpback whales. And I basically proposed that to Canon as being, look, I'll do it for the same price, cover my flights, and it's not going to cost you the earth. So we went and did a 2-week shoot, which was supposed to be a 3-hour interview in a studio. And I think when I look back at the sort of pivotal decisions that sort of got us to Tales by Light and these other big projects, certainly the decision to go to Africa was a big one. It also gave me a lot of material to then show to companies like Canon that, could start redefining what I was known for or what I could be known for. And then the decision to go to Tonga with Darren was the content that we created from that. Of course, how can we go wrong diving with whales? We took a drone. I had a friend, Toby De Jong, come and do the flying. It was early days of droning. It was a custom-built hexcopter. No DJI stuff back then, and very big, cumbersome and dangerous. But we just got great material, and that piece of content was really, it shone for Canon, and they were really, stoked with it, and they, it screened all over the place. And it was actually off the back of that, really the back of that 6-minute clip, that I proposed to them the idea of doing a series, a long format series on following photographers around the world. I think originally I proposed to do 12 episodes, and we cut it back to 6, which was a bit more manageable, and it was a good decision. And really it was based off that decision to go to Tonga and the Africa material. I had a bit of a sizzle reel of what the show could be. And then, things flowed from there. And so I think maybe the lesson is you can't make every decision on financial. If you made every decision just purely what would the financial return be that you can quantify, I don't think you'd get as far as quickly. You've got to go with what your heart says is the right decision, and sometimes and often it isn't, financial. But I guess the net long-term effect is that it can lead to financial, and that will follow if obviously you can produce the goods and you've got something to say, and you can pull the content together. And we keep doing that today. We've got several projects. We've got other series in development. We've just finished Tales by Light 3, season 3, which is coming to Netflix in December 21st, and the Big Cat Tales series, which is a sort of a break. It's a show that that originated from Tales. One of the great things about Tales by Light, and it's in its 3rd season, just completed, is all these people that we've managed to meet around the world and become friends with and spent time with in the field. It's sort of almost like you're shooting a pilot with every different person, because you could take that in a different direction, and that's exactly what's happened with Jonathan and Angela Scott in Africa, in Kenya. We shot an episode with them in season 2 of Tales by Light, and by the end of that shoot, we'd already decided, let's give it a crack, let's make a series. We just had such a great time working together. So, it's, if you look back on anyone's life, what decisions lead to where you are today. But I think, that's right, the other point I was going to make is we continue to do experimental shoots, and we've got a couple that can't really talk about now because they're sort of under embargo, but there's a couple of things that are coming out soon that were the result of a passion project, and I think I talk about that a bit, that you've got to make room. It's really important to make room for those projects, the things that don't fit into a paid job, or they don't fit into what you're doing, and there are times when you can really experiment. Sometimes it's nice not having an end client, with restrictions, and sometimes that's when the most exciting things can happen. Maybe it's sort of like, music videos is where all the experimental cinematography used to come from. You could sort of argue there was more free reign, and I sort of look at those little projects. So trying to do one a year is, important for us to do, and it's good too if you have a team for motivation and doing something special. Then sort of it's exciting to see what opportunities can come from those projects, because it's a little bit more, they're a little bit like wild card projects. And if they don't take a huge amount of time and expense. We're not talking months. Sometimes they're a week or two to go do something.
So you've done 3 seasons of Tales by Light, and I'm just interested to know, how did you maintain the disciplines? Because you weren't just a cinematographer, you were the director, the producer, the writer, and there's amazing footage that you've shot. Also, you were able to have really interesting content as well as far as your subjects and ensuring that the audience are engaged and maintain a complete episode. What is it that allow you to be able to maintain all those disciplines at a high quality?
Well, thank you, first of all, for that. I think it is hard, I guess, a challenge to wear multiple hats, but it's sort of just what I've been doing for the last several years, and also the people I work with, the great cameramen that I work with in the field are also of that sort of breed. I mean, I've heard the word predator used, where people are a shooter, director, editor. That's sort of the modern type of, operator these days for in a lot of fields. I don't come from a traditional film background on sets where, and I obviously have a huge amount of respect for people who do that work, but it's a different hierarchy of working, and so many of the projects we've had for the last decade have been where you need to direct it, shoot it, light it, often edit it, or work closely with editors. And so, it's not really partitioned up like with a huge crew. Yeah, I mean, I guess the Tales by Light was a lot to take on. But, when you're so passionate about the subject matter, for example, writing, I mean, the writing of it is, a lot of it has unfolded naturally as we've shot it doco style, and especially the last 2 seasons. And we've tried to, I think we've definitely grown throughout the process of making Tales by Light. I think Tales by Light 3, I'm proud of the work everyone's done on all 3 seasons, but I think it's evolving. The storytelling is evolving, and we tend to, I guess, direct it, but we don't have to come back and sort of write the story at the end. By the time we've finished a project, we pretty much have it in the can and often don't need much in terms of connecting narration and setup. In fact, Dylan Rivers' episode, the story on capturing Indigenous culture in Northern Australia, it only had an intro by Sigrid Thornton in the first minute that introduced Dylan. A few segue moments, and because we're just trying to stay as true to life as possible and have it in the field. And it's interesting too, like talking about shooting style, if you look at the cinematography aspect, I mean, I love shooting like anyone does, chasing the big, bold, beautiful images. But I think getting too focused on that stuff, it means you miss out on, if you're waiting for the perfect light for your perfect drone shot, you end up, missing the point of what you're there to do, and it's to capture the story. So we try to roll as much as we can, and it's particularly the projects we're working on now. We're actually in the early stages of production for a doco feature at the moment, and we're just trying to shoot as absolute much as possible. Every Skype call, every sort of meeting about the project is recorded, and a lot of that isn't far from cinematic, but it's giving us the story, so it's always a tug of war in your brain between on locations between the pretty stuff and the juicy story material. And I think as long as you're self-aware of that, you can actually, and you've got a team around you that everyone's, you've all sort of had good prep and you know how you're going to shoot it, what type of cameras you're going to capture different elements of the story. You want nimble handheld stuff that's not going to slow you down if you're going to be jumping in and out of cars and trying to capture things, or boats, and capture things as they happen ad hoc. And the bigger, more cumbersome rigs, you just don't end up pulling them out of the suitcase at all, because until maybe those times where you maybe just are going to focus on the images. So, I think, but surrounding yourself with great people as well, where you're all honed on the right. You're all honed in on the story. You work in sync together. That's very important. And we all share the tasks of the cameras and the sound and the droning and the underwater work. And so, it's but at times it's a non-stop thing, really, too. I think if you've ever done doco work in the field, you really don't rest until you get home. It's 24/7, because you're backing up at night in the hotel room or the tent, reviewing what you've got for the day, trying to plan for the next day, and then you're up before sunrise, often trying to get those early morning hours, and then you're but it's fabulous work, and when we're tired or sick or whatnot, you just got to remind yourself that you're doing stuff that a lot of people dream of doing, and you don't take it for granted. I think that's really important. So yeah, it's but I think the key thing we always want to do, we're always trying to grow. You're always trying to get better. I think resting on your laurels and trying to and redoing what you did last time because it worked, it'll get old pretty quickly. So plus it keeps you alive, keeps you excited about what you're doing, and it's always good to set challenges for yourself.
With subject matters, how did you go about deciding on who you would like to cover? Obviously, these are passionate photographers and imaging type of work where they're obviously focused at a message rather than just pretty pictures. But even then, how do you find all these people that you think this would be really interesting? Obviously,
research is at our fingertips today. And also the circles you move in and the interest that we naturally have of nature, conservation, the underwater world, indigenous cultures. They're the sort of people and social media accounts that we look and research, and they're the people we talk to. So once you're in that world, naturally names will resurface a few times. And of course, asking advice of people we've worked with in the past who, Tales by Light specifically, is following photographers, but also it's grown into cinematographers as well. I mean, in the last season of Tales by Light, Sean Heinrichs, he's an underwater filmmaker and photographer. And Dylan River, he's a filmmaker more than a photographer, which is nice, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's imagery, storytelling through images, motion or stills. But yeah, I think we do. Having said that, we still really take our time now with the casting of, the next series, because it's absolutely everything, really. You need someone to be a package. They obviously need to be a great photographer or filmmaker, but to have a real purpose about what they do and have a mission that's often greater than themselves. I think that's what the show's become. So to be a great photographer and also to be able to articulate themselves on camera is really important, because if they can't express what they're feeling, what they're doing, it makes it hard to document their process. So, and obviously the subject matter that they focus on, it's got to be something we're interested in doing too. And we've had incredible freedom to follow the stories that we find interesting. It's worked so far, and I think, but just taking our time with it has proven to be very good, because you want to make that, want to get halfway through a project and have the wrong subject,
During the process, in any of the series that you've done so far, has there an outcome that you've had that really surprised you?
Yeah, I think, well, look, talking about the latest series, Dylan River's story of following the footsteps of his grandmother, who was one of the pioneering founders of Karma, which is it's a media association in Alice Springs was set up to sort of document and spread awareness of culture among Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory. Dylan's journey was to go and document some thriving, existing Aboriginal culture in the Territory, and we went back to places he'd been, and it was really, for me it was eye-opening, because even though I felt like I know Australia pretty well, having done 3 years of travel and had met, communities and seen a bit of the Aboriginal world, I was still really amazed and, honoured, thrilled to see what we saw through Dylan's eyes, and that was great. And I was really proud to be Aussie and proud of what we've got. And I think too often, and I'm guilty of this too, we go to Africa and other places, Papua New Guinea, to shoot our, Indigenous stories and maybe ignore a little bit what's on our back doorstep. And I think we just scratched the surface with the story we told. We only had an hour to do it, but there's so much more out there that should be recorded in Australia. I'd love to do more Aboriginal Australian stories. And I think, back to season 2, the shark story, which is still for a lot of people, was one of the biggest impacts, based on feedback from that series, which was Eric Chang and Jim Abernethy diving with the tiger sharks in the Bahamas and patting these huge bull sharks, tiger sharks, and the interactions and, the sentient, Jim describes them as sentient beings like a dog, and it was exactly what he said it would be, and it was amazing. And even Eric, who had done many dives there in the past with Jim, he hadn't seen the evolution of that interaction that Jim has had with the sharks, and that blew our minds, you know. And then I knew we had something very special when we shot that, and you know, it was interesting too. You know, Nat Geo screened that series, and they put out like a 3-minute little cut down of the sharks' story, and it was called "Are Sharks Like Dogs," which was a really, you know, clickbait title, and it had 23 million views in 5 days or something. It just went bananas. You know, 40 or 50,000 comments, and all of them that I read were all people like, wow, I'll never see sharks the same way again. This has redefined what I think of them. They're not just killing machines. So that sort of impact, that's the biggest thing we get out of the platform of what we have with Tales by Light, and now Netflix, of course, reaching so many people, is the ability to really change perspectives, influence people, hopefully have a good and a deep impact on the world. So that opportunity is sort of really, you sort of feel a responsibility to use that well, wisely, if you've got that, and we've got the freedom we have to choose. And that's sort of why we've focused on the stories we have. It's definitely been a big factor. So yeah, I mean, how much more do you want in terms of, you know, fulfillment? You know, we feel very fortunate to be able to go shoot the stuff we love to do, but have a purpose behind it, and hopefully change the world for a little bit of the better.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly you can have this kind of thing where you're doing a very fulfilling job as a filmmaker or whatever, if you're doing what you love, but sometimes it can become almost selfish indulgence, you know what I mean? Like it's a risk that you could take. So yeah, like, and that's why it's like, why are you doing this? Like, is it just so I get to shoot cool film and get to go underwater and shoot all the cool stuff, or is it actually have a purpose and I can help someone else with it? Like, I think, to me, even in film world, like when you're telling a story, I think that's kind of what I hope to be part of. So yeah, definitely I think you've captured that part of it. We can talk a little bit about gear. Obviously the first season was you really jumping into using some of the latest Canon gear. Back then, you know, the 1DC was just like, well, what is this? What kind of challenges did you have by being forced to use that gear?
The good thing is we didn't actually have any, you know, we did have freedom with what we used, and we weren't forced actually to use anything particularly. And we've still used a lot of Canon equipment right through from the start to now. Of course, I think it's, you know, like any modern filmmaker cameraman knows, that there's a lot of different choices for glass, for cameras, for drones. Well, maybe not so much choice for drones now, DJI dominates so much, but it's a different tool for every job. So I think we really use a big variety of cameras and glass, and it's great because it's ever changing. The technology, you know, week to week, there's new kit that comes out, and we're trying to find stuff that physically works for us, but also obviously has the best picture quality, best bit rates. The choice to go 4K wasn't imposed on us at the beginning. You know, that was a choice that we made, and thankfully we made it. I mean, Netflix wouldn't have taken Tales by Light, they even said that, if it wasn't 4K. You know, they were, back in when they took that in 2014, 15, it was 15, they were, I think they'd already sort of started to implement this 4K only on new content. And I know of other, you know, filmmakers that have back, you know, now everyone, of course, it's pretty ubiquitous, but back, you know, 2-3 years ago, that some people were not deciding, and a couple had really regretted not going 4K, because certainly in the beginning, and it's still expensive and the data's massive, but certainly in the beginning it was even harder, but all of that paid off. I mean, my favourite bit of kit in the last couple of years has been the 50 to 1000, that huge Canon lens, which, you know, very few people own it, rental houses own it, but I got lent one by Canon for the Big Cat show, which is coming out on Animal Planet in a couple of weeks. And we took it on the first shoot, and it was just such a game changer. You know, I can't tell you how incredible it was. And I had met a camera woman in the Mara a year before who had one, and she was raving and just said it was the ultimate wildlife lens. And I don't think I even put my hands on one until I actually got the one delivered to us to take. And, you know, to be able to go from 50 millimeters to 1000, and it's parfocal, and it's razor sharp, and it's, we've got the servo zoom and the zoom demand, the focus demand. It's just like this freedom is unbelievable. It doesn't have IS, so filming out of a truck was still tricky because, the bounce was, noticeable, especially above, maybe 400 or 500 mil. But shooting high res as well, we were able to stabilise a lot. The beauty of shooting 4K plus. But that lens, we shot sequences in that series that were just, first of all, they wouldn't have been possible to have shot them. Cheetah chases and some crocs in the river, some action sequences that were just, you could cover every focal length you needed without a lens swap. And the reach, sometimes we're filming a leopard across a river in a tree chased by baboons, and it's like 200-300 meters away, and be able to cover the whole scene and to be right there. So that was a game changer. And I got back from that shoot and I just said to Canon, well, it was smart lending me that lens because I've got to buy one now, and we since have bought one. But yeah, so it's probably rare that a piece of kit changes what you do so dramatically, but that was one example where it totally did. And I guess, of course, drones, like we all know how much drones have changed what we all do, but I think also using drones so extensively early on for Tales was something that helped it get noticed visually, because in 2014 we were going to a lot of places, filming the whales in Tonga and flying them over volcanoes, and that wasn't as, we've forgotten how recently it has been so easy, I guess, and it wasn't easy 4 years ago. But doing all that and doing that in 4K was great, and set a sort of a benchmark for us. So yeah, kit, I mean, it's a constant love and hate relationship, isn't it, kit? Especially trying to travel and drag it around the world, we always say it's always a cable that lets you down. It's just always a cable. I guess they're the weakest link. They literally come out of the cameras and they can get caught and pinched, and how many spares do you take of a particular cable? Especially all these, I really hate these sort of fine HDMI. I mean, HDMI is a horrible format in itself, but then, these thin little cables that get, so easily damaged. So it's the bane of our existence, and it's almost always a cable that has the issues.
Yeah, it's a bit of that's a catch-22 though, because wireless, as much as we love it, it can let you down so much easier than cables. So
exactly, you can't win. And but no, look, it's great, and I love talking kit as well as and we certainly have a lot of time on these shoots to talk about the latest gear, and we always laugh that we can go away for a whole month and we can talk gear the whole time and still not run out of things to talk about. So yeah.
I guess I wanted to do a couple of questions, maybe stories or things you've encountered that when shooting, mostly, on location with these kind of projects, is, some of the pros and cons, some of the challenges you might add and how you overcame them, and also what you maybe love compared to maybe doing a more controlled lighting type situation, and how that differs and what you love about it.
Yeah, well, look, the beauty of Tales by Light is just the variety of subject matter that we've encountered. It certainly keeps it exciting for us. Small crew is how we've been operating for the last few years. So 3 to 4 is typical in the field. We've even had shoots as low as 2 of us, but yeah, 3 at a minimum and 4 is really nice. So if there's 3 of us, there'd be 2 on camera running sound, and if I'm directing, I'd be shooting and directing and have a second operator and someone with a boom. And occasionally we've sort of got the luxury of having Louis, our producer, as well on shoots. Things like in India, Asian countries, basically wherever we're dealing with lots of people, it's really good to have it, at least that extra person along. If we're doing more wildlife shoots where it's pretty much you in the field, then having that extra set of hands is always helpful, but it's not as necessary. But yeah, dealing with just such a variety of situations. I guess people are always going to be the hardest and probably the most dangerous animal that you're going to encounter. When you're out doing pure wildlife work, then it's usually weather. If it's diving, there's inherent risks with diving. But yeah, always the biggest challenges are usually around people. And of course, then you've got the sort of logistical side of things with permits or flying under the radar without permits. If you're doing drone work, all of those things, we try to mitigate as much of the hassle factors before we leave. But there's always things that you've got to. Every day is a new challenge in the field, but it sort of keeps it exciting. And because we move quite quickly as a small team, we can really achieve a lot, fly under the radar. It's sort of how a lot of these places just really wouldn't be practical any other way. Bangladesh was a good example recently. Shooting in a big city, trying to keep a low footprint, a small footprint, low profile, and also if you're dealing with situations with kids or tough situations with people, humanitarian sort of situations, then coming in with a huge team is not really going to work. Or if you're doing tribal work up in Papua New Guinea, or we've done a lot of stuff in Africa. You just want to blend in as much as possible, which can be hard actually if you're a white film crew, but being personable with people and the less of you, the better. In terms of the shooting, we don't light a lot. I'll start that again. In terms of the lighting, I guess there's been a lot of natural light shooting, harnessing the light that we've got. We usually take light panels or we take a Dito. We have a few things, bounce, scrims, but it's normally just more about controlling where we shoot, what time of day, blocking light occasionally or diffusing it, bouncing it, that sort of thing. Not doing a lot of lighting as such. I guess on the underwater shoots, we're using lights occasionally, but just like on the surface, you're trying to get the light away from your camera if you can, and lighting off camera. That's where an extra diver comes in handy as well. So it's just. That's the way I love to shoot. I wouldn't call myself a lighting DP as such. Be more of a natural doco. That's where my strengths lie. And of course, sometimes we do light interviews and things, but it's a smaller part of our work. And I guess the good thing is the speed of the cameras these days and the lenses, and we're working with some pretty amazing equipment. You're certainly not lighting for exposure anymore. It's all lighting for mood, if at all. But it's a huge variety, so it's very hard to say what one thing we do. It's all very, very different, and it keeps it exciting.
I guess I want to move on to technology. Maybe I guess the challenges in the industry and how you think that what we have right now, how that's affecting the industry as far as whether it's going to bring more people into the playing field, or is it that it's become too easy to capture good image in a way without sounding, bit basic about it. What are your thoughts as far as the impact of the future technology? And also, I guess, what do you hope the kind of technologies that do come soon? Like, what are you finding as a filmmaker that you'd love to have?
Yeah, it's an age-old question, isn't it? It was probably the same thing happened when HD came along. People thought, it's going to be a equalizer, and I think definitely technology is democratized the industry. When I went to film school in 2000, certainly it was, you're shooting on film, you want to shoot a short film, you got to shoot on 16 mil. It was just there was a big barrier, and that's long gone. But I still think it's definitely the stories you have to tell. What you've got to say with your films, and that's still a separator. So I think it's great because I think people who may not have had access to things, they can now shoot. There's no excuse in the technology side of things. It's really cheap and easy to get your hands on good quality equipment. But again, it just comes back to the person behind the camera, what they've got, what they want to shoot. So, but I do love, like all of us, I do love my gear, and I can justify, luckily, buying the latest cameras. I think the bigger cameras, things haven't changed too much for a while. I think the big changes in the smaller compacts, the mirrorless, the quality, the bit rate is finally getting there, and then the high speed, more than 25 frames, and the low light. But I think the bit rate's the big one that's been holding it back. So as you see more cameras come out with higher bit rates, you can start using those cameras and cut them in with the the big boys, and that's really important for us for a lot of the sort of handheld shooting in back of vehicles type setups where you just can't have, where you really struggle with the big cameras. So that's brilliant, and we're always using a mix of different glass, different cameras, and if it's definitely the prerequisite, it's 4K, of course. Everything we shoot's 4K plus. I always say 4K plus because it's often 6K or 8K now even. I mean, the drone technology has now got to a point where I could be very happy for the next many years with an Inspire 2. I think, being able to shoot 6K RAW, now they've got ProRes RAW, is awesome. Interchangeable lenses, great flight time, so it's, doesn't really make me wanting for much more. Of course, we'll always upgrade when things improve, but that's brilliant. That's totally opened up the world of aerials. I guess one thing with things becoming more ubiquitous is, you use drones for an example, they're just everywhere. So of course, with a lot of people and the general public flying them, and why not, they're fun. You do have, unfortunately, more issues. If you look at Africa, a lot of these places like Masai Mara with migration, a lot of people have been flying drones, and of course it can just it's very disruptive, and if people aren't being considerate, it's bad for the wildlife, bad for the public, and then of course more laws come in, and so we've seen that all around the world where the laws just keep getting tighter and tighter, and there's security issues as well, of course, with potential terrorism and all other things. So I like it when there's permits to apply for, because it means that we can actually, if we're a professional film crew, we can get in and get the permit. And for a good example is Antarctica. We're going down to South Georgia in a couple of weeks' time, and we've been able to obtain some very rare drone permits for South Georgia through a 6-month process. And very few people have flown drones in South Georgia with all the, we get beaches with 250,000 king penguins. So I'm just, buzzing at the thought of what we're going to be able to capture down there. But we're going to obviously have to do it in a really careful way and do all the right things, and don't spoil it. It's not only spoiling it for you and, of course, the impacts on the wildlife, but you don't want to screw it up for the people that follow. That goes across not just droning, but all production in the field. Is that the worst thing you can do is give documentary crews a bad name. You want to leave it better than you left it, so than you arrived, and that's to do with how you interact with the local people, making sure your impact on the environment is zero, taking everything with you, and not disturbing the wildlife, and so that's really important, because at the end of the day, it's not about everything. People are keen to get the shot and get the story, but you can't come at a cost to what you're leaving behind. It's just, you'd be pretty hypocritical if you're doing that. So that's a bit of a core value for us, and but yeah, it's exciting to see where it's going. I mean, I can't even think where it'll be in another 10, 15 years. It seems like every year things progress a lot, but what won't change is the stories. And if you can tell stories that have got a bit of longevity to them, that are a bit timeless, then hopefully they will stand the test of time for many years. And so that's sort of what we try to do.
And so other than having maybe, which I totally agree with, really tightening up on some of these drone laws, and really it's the normal consumers that probably ruin it, because they don't learn anything about what you are allowed to and not allowed to do, and that makes it really hard. But outside of that, is there any technology you really hope that you'd like to see come to fruition?
I think, look, right now it's probably the smaller cameras just being as powerful as possible, not having any compromise in the image quality you can get. And then image stabilization technology, I guess I'll probably see that continuing to a point where everything will be image stabilized if you want it. The sensors, the lenses in the future. And of course adding IS to big lenses makes them even bigger. I mean, we've got the 50-1000, it doesn't have any IS, which probably surprises people being such a long lens. But if they added IS, it would be a third or half as big again. So they obviously made a decision that if people are on that, they're probably on very long, they're on sticks and they're doing long lens work. Yeah, so I just think, the bit rates to improve on the smaller cameras. Resolution, look, I'll probably eat my words in a few years, but I can't see. The good thing is about shooting, people have this argument about 4K, or maybe not so much now anymore in 4K, but shooting higher than 4K, why would you shoot that? And they argue, well, you don't see it, but they're forgetting all of the ability to, all the post control that you can have. So, shooting 4K, straight 4K, I actually don't like doing now, because it gives me no room for any adjustment, later horizons, or, you can, but you're going to be sacrificing and now dropping your below your format. So shooting 6K for 4K, and that's where 8K will come into it. When it gives you that flexibility. And I guess in the future, in the next decade, when 8K becomes something that maybe is delivered more. I mean, Japan, I think, have already broadcast some stuff, or they're doing the World Cup in 8K, doing a limited broadcast. That once you make that your standard, then having a bit of flexibility there might be something that would push it beyond that. I certainly think for home theatres, 4K, even 4K's, nearing it, unless you have the bigger screens. And but it's just all about image quality. I think you can get caught up in numbers, but great image quality is what it's all about. And certainly, your phone can shoot 4K. Does that mean it's, better than something that's shooting 2K at high bit rate? And it's all the other aspects of an image have to be taken into consideration. So I think just all these improvements. There's nothing. I mean, I don't know. There'll probably be other things that come out that will be game changers, like the brushless gimbal, the Movies and things was a big game changer, and I guess that technology will continue to evolve and get probably more and more compact all the time. So but gee, we're pretty spoilt now, so I don't see a huge amount of. Oh, actually, probably the biggest thing is if there was a huge technological leap in hard drive size. I think that would be so welcome, because it hasn't seemed to have been able to keep up with the file sizes. Seem to be outpacing the speed of how big the drives are getting. We're still only talking 8 terabyte drives. Okay, you can get 10 terabyte hard drives, and and of course to see that in solid state is where if we had a huge leap forward in solid state and huge capacity. I mean, I've heard of these. You hear of these sort of bleeding edge drives being developed. That'd be awesome, because we can. Fast, large drives that are really robust will be fantastic for the field, because we just spend so much of our evenings capturing now. It's really hard, and it's an extra toll on your fitness. So they're all things, and I'm sure as long as people keep buying stuff, they'll keep pushing the technology.
Well, I mean, people forget with. High resolution capture, as long as it's not upscale or anything, that with 8K it actually gives you more rendition on edges, and obviously color definition as well. That's what people kind of forget, that yes, more resolution is good, but it's actually more what it does to the color and the image itself, that it actually starts becoming more natural, I guess, the way I see, that you put a 4K censored shot of something, and then you put an 8K shot next to it, and just look at a nice close-up of, not even close-up, but just seeing how it renders the edges of things, even on lenses, like the kind of characteristics you get from a vintage lens, that the kind of output you get from a vintage lens on an 8K sensor is actually, it brings in that character much nicer than it would on a 4K. So these are little things that I'm a huge thing for higher resolution capturing, as long as the sensor is obviously designed for that. The next thing I want to talk about is maybe the Australian industry as a filmmaker. And I know that you're, I guess, doing more documentary work, but even that, I think there's not a huge amount being made. And I suppose how things that we could maybe consider about how we can get that evolution happening of supporting more Australian content to be created, and more like the content what you're doing, or with narrative films as well, that have a bit more to it other than reality TV, because we know that there's plenty of that, but that's not really got a voice of any sort. It doesn't really add anything to anyone's life other than entertainment, which is not a bad merit, but still at the end, in the long terms, it's the long-term effect you want. So I guess, that's what are your thoughts on the film industry in itself in Australia, as far as both, documentary and narrative kind of filmmaking?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak that knowledgeably about the narrative side of things, because that's more, it's more your world, I guess. For doco, I mean, there are some fantastic grants available. You've got the producers offset, and there's other mechanisms that grants can be applied for, and full budget grants for docos and things. I mean, we've managed to navigate that ourselves, but it's been hard. I think probably some more workshops about how those applications work with Screen Australia, Screen New South Wales. Every state seems to have its own body, and I've heard that it does tend to be the same people applying, because once you get successful at knowing how to do it, it does favour the people who are in it. So I think, if they want diversity and they want new people coming in, opening up that, that mystery of it would be good. And I guess more incentives, government assistance would be fantastic. I guess especially because documentary, and especially feature documentaries, are very hard to fund and distribute. But I think you can argue there's a really good social need for the country to have it. And there needs to be a lot more people, a bigger cross-section of voices. So incentives, government incentives, I think workshops and forums for educating people about how those processes work. And then I think the other thing that's probably everyone's trying to grapple with from the broadcast side is just how the landscape's changed in terms of how people ingest media. There's for a long time there's been quotas of Australian content for broadcasters, laws about, otherwise if they didn't have those quotas for television, there just wouldn't be probably much at all, maybe some news made in Australia, but they wouldn't do Australian shows because they can buy shows so cheaply. And that forces networks to make shows, but of course a lot of those shows they can be any Australian shows. They do favour, sports and I guess, soaps and big shows like X Factor and those sort of Australia's Got Talent type shows still qualify. So the sort of more niche, eclectic documentaries, there's nothing pressing the networks to actually air those types of programs. And then as things go to more VOD platforms, is that going to be something that's going to be imposed on the VOD? Like you've got your Stans, Netflix. To my knowledge, there's no quota on those platforms, so there's no need for them to buy Australian content in Australia. But that could be laws that could quite easily come in, and if they did, then those platforms to operate in Australia would have an obligation to show more Australian content, and I think that's a good thing. So I think that would be a great thing for not only for the producers, but I think for the public, because it's going to see more Australian stories come to the screen, and we're such a big country, there's so many untold stories, and I actually feel guilty I haven't done enough in Australia too. I do travel a lot outside of the country, and I'd love to shoot more here, and so all those things probably could certainly help the industry a lot.
What are your thoughts on the idea of maybe trying to engage local larger businesses, obviously not, well, even small businesses, but possibly larger businesses, to try and invest in these kind of projects, the value? I mean, like you said, there's a tax offset to make awareness. Like we've tried to, even with the films that we've worked on, the producers and the director, I remember were trying to really convince businesses that, look, with the offset, it's actually a really good deal because you can actually get a good chunk of your money back. Or in our case, you get it back after 18 months or 12 months after the theatrical release. So to convince businesses to get more involved and support that part of it.
Tales by Light's a great example of a company like Canon Australia, who I think are really forward thinking, and for them to produce content, it is technically branded content, that series, but you wouldn't know it. And in fact, Netflix took it on face value. They took it on what the show was, and it wasn't overt advertising, but it's a brand behind it. And I think smart companies will in the future, and they are now, looking at especially long form content, but also short form content, as a way of cutting through and getting their brand out there and getting, it's a much softer sale. But I think audiences around the world, everyone's so sophisticated now about being sold to. So I think I don't think people mind seeing that there's a brand behind a show like Tales, because it's been done in the right way. And so if companies can do things like that and get, tax benefits as well, then I think, you will see more movement in that way. And I don't know, I'd be certainly happy to make that argument. I guess I'm pretty busy doing my own thing at the moment to think about those things as much, but certainly if there's an opportunity to help, our little voice, we've got a good story to tell for a small production company and the people it employs here in my company. So it's actually two of my staff just came back from Wildscreen in Bristol, which is it's a biannual wildlife filmmakers conference, and there's also one every second year in Jackson Hole, the sort of sister festivals, and they've just come back so buzzing about, you know, what's out there in the other producers around the world, and you don't want to be a big fish in a small pond. So, you know, we're always trying to look elsewhere to bring you, you know, see what else has been done, the incredible work, and it's very inspiring for us to try to grow in the future and produce better work and the contacts. And having said that, there are incentives. I can't remember the name of it now, but there are grants, government grants, you know, rebates available for international travel. So I think producers, I'd encourage them to look into those grants, and you can get a good whack of your travel spend back. Certainly in the first year you get the bigger amount back, but it's per project. So if you're smart about it, you can actually be getting a lot of your travel covered if it's promoting Australia and Australian services and businesses. So, you know, we're pretty lucky, really. You can't take it for granted, all these different things that are out there. You know, a lot of countries have nothing like that. So, yeah, just getting educated is really important.
You mentioned, obviously, the Big Cat Legacy, I think it's called. Is that right?
Actually, Big Cat Tales. The name, it was a name change right at the last minute.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what's in store for that, and what new things you've done in those shows, and that's for Animal Planet as well, isn't it?
Big Cat Tales was an incredible project. I might have mentioned before, one of the fantastic things about Tales by Light as a series is that the diversity of people we've been able to work with has meant we've almost had, you know, a pilot with each person. You know, we've been able to shoot with so many different filmmakers and photographers in different parts of the world, and of course, naturally, the mind starts racing about, you know, you could do a whole series on this. And one of those couples was Jonathan and Angela Scott, the Big Cat people, that people know them all around the world from a show called Big Cat Diary that was on the BBC, and it was syndicated through the 90s and finished about 8-9 years ago. I'd seen them on 60 Minutes with Ray Martin maybe 10 years ago and thought they were amazing. And we shot Tales by Light with them. And it was off the back of that shoot. We had such a fantastic time shooting in the Masai Mara in Kenya. They actually proposed to me, look, you know, we've loved this. Would you consider doing a new series on the Big Cats with us? In the same vein as Big Cat Diary, but a new show. And of course I was in, you know, I was totally, you know, excited for that. We didn't have any backing, and these things are tough to fund. And we had a window in our schedules. They were available, I was available, I had my team, and I just thought, you know what, let's just take this opportunity between projects to shoot it. You know, we didn't need a huge amount of money to get there and start shooting. And I should say that the only reason it was possible was all of Jonathan's contacts. You know, we got subsidised accommodation through Governor's Camp. We had huge support from the Kenyan government, the tourism, the Narok County, the Masai Mara National Reserve, all of these different people that Jonathan's got fantastic contacts with. We were honest. We said, look, we're going to self-fund a series about the big cats. They've known what's happened through you know, good television before, and so we had incredible support. It was only through that support we could have done it, because I still had to sort of borrow, you know, many hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a year to fly in and out our teams, and even at these reduced rates. So it was a punt, but I just believed in it so much. I believed in, you know, Jonathan and Angela, and Jackson Lucia is a Maasai host as well that we had, who was fantastic, and with a great crew. We spent about 3 months filming in the first half of 2017, unfunded. Through, you know, without getting into the nitty-gritty, we had some negotiations with the network, didn't really get to where we wanted to get to, and then sort of at the 11th hour, late in 2017, Animal Planet, we managed to get some of the footage in front of them, and the new global president, Susanna Dinage, saw it, loved Jonathan and Angela, and just scooped it up for her channel, and it was her first acquisition for Animal Planet as the new boss. And it's just wonderful because we've got a network that believes in it and that sees a future in the show, and has been incredibly supportive, and we're working with great producers in New York who've been, you know, very light touch, but they've also given some great insights and great feedback, and we've worked on the post-production side with them a little bit. So, you know, I was all for that, about bringing the best shows possible to the screen, and we've got a 5-part series, 5 1 hours, airing in the US on the 29th of October this year, 2018, and the rest of the territories following soon after. We don't have dates for the UK, Europe, Australia, but hopefully before Christmas it'll hit the other networks, and they're very excited, we're very excited, and it's also being launched in conjunction with the Irwins, Bindi and Robert Terry. They've got a new show. It's their first, I think, big network show since Steve Irwin passed. So it's sort of cool that we're, part of this reboot for Animal Planet, and it was a completely self-funded, self-belief type project. But yeah, and now we're hopeful that it'll become an annual. But we had amazing content in the field, amazing stories and sequences we shot with the cats, and the show's, there's nothing quite like it on TV at the moment, because you're following the lives of individual cats and their families. So they're named cats. You're following Bahati the leopard, and Malika the cheetah, and the marsh pride, and their cubs, raising their cubs, and there's obviously territorial battles, and there's interactions with other animals, and the migration appears, and it's just all real, and it just plays out in front of the camera. And what brings it to life is the hosts. The hosts are incredible, and it's just, they've got such a history in the Mara. They've got decades and decades of time with the cats, so they can talk about many generations of lions, and there's an authenticity that comes with that you wouldn't get with someone who's flown in, who might just be good on, who can speak well, but they don't have that background. So it was an amazing process, and I think it gave me a lot of, these projects, these experiences, backing yourself and going for it. That one didn't have any funding, but, I think Tales by Light gave us the confidence to do it, and it worked out, incredibly well. Now it's just about getting, hopefully the show will be well received, and it's sort of exciting to see it play out now, and you have to keep an eye out for it in Australia when it hits Animal Planet.
What's a film that inspires you whenever you go back and you watch it again? You just love watching it because it just gets you inspired. Is there a film or a documentary?
Well, I have to go back to Baraka always, because I think it was the first film that really just set my mind on fire with, the world, and I thought it was absolutely incredible. It still holds up so well today. If anyone hasn't seen Baraka, you should definitely see it, at least on 4K Blu-ray, or if you get to see a screening of it. They do screen that film occasionally. That was amazing, an amazing visual masterpiece of the planet, a snapshot of the planet. That's always, incredible. I love, of course, the Blue Planets and Planet Earths and all that blue chip amazing stuff the BBC does. But I also love the gritty sort of wildlife docos like The Cove, Blackfish. Cove particularly was I thought was amazing. Obviously, it was good enough to win an Oscar. And I think you could argue it's not particularly cinematic. It's just a very hard-hitting story that was shot and told incredibly well. And that's where I've got my eyes set on doing feature docs and series. I don't think one's better than the other. I think some stories are better suited to maybe a documentary feature. But I guess the ultimate goal is to make cinematic films that are hard-hitting, to mix the two, and where you've got the luxury of the big pictures, go for it. When the story calls for button cams or that sort of gritty run and gun stuff, then do that. And to make films that really have an impact, can change policy, change laws, bring big issues to wide audiences. That's my goal ultimately, and to be able to do that and enjoy your craft, and then know that you're making a difference. What more do you want out of life, really? So that's my goal. Plus having the work-life balance that's everyone chases, spending time with family. It's very important, especially with a young son now, and that's sort of my focus moving forward.
And how do you balance your life? I did want to touch a little bit on that. Like, what's some of the things you try and alleviate those issues that obviously I've experienced myself, being away 3-4 months, and
Yeah, it's really hard. It's I think just being conscious of it, first of all, acknowledging it is the first step. I think a lot of people it's very easy to get caught up in the filming world. And I think being very careful of booking things in advance. A lot of things we're doing, 6 or 9 months in advance. It seems like you work it out, but if you fill your calendar up, well then, you won't have the opportunity to make time. So I'm really trying to be careful in the scheduling of things and making sure I've got, a few weeks between shoots. Trying to limit the length of time being away. I think 3 weeks is really trying to be the maximum time, and only rarely breaking that rule. So yeah, I certainly haven't perfected it yet. But when I'm home, I'm trying to be home and be present. And but I think because we're sort of focusing in on these big projects and not filling our calendar with lots of small, for want of a better word, tedious, smaller jobs. If we can focus on big projects, then I think at least it doesn't. You've got a clearer sort of idea of what you need to do in between shoots, and you don't get every hour of your week consumed. That's the idea anyway. I haven't really perfected it, but I don't want to miss out on my son's childhood. I want to be there, and as he gets older too, traveling together will be fantastic, and doing certain shoots together where it's appropriate. My wife and I, before we had our son, she for a whole year did travel and was part of the crew in 2014, which is amazing. But even then, I think even working with a partner, if people do that, you still need to make that time. You might say you're together a lot, but it's different. Working together is very different to sort of being alone together. That alone time's, where you switch off is really important. So, yeah, it's. I don't think you can sort of solve the problem. I think it's something that you just constantly have to work on, probably like fitness or, other things. It's a lifelong lifestyle. But yeah, there's certainly many. Unfortunately, really many cases of broken marriages in the film industry because of lack of time and attention, and I don't want to be one of the statistics. So we're really going to work hard to keep a happy family.
It's a little bit underestimated as well, because people forget that mentally you're being affected by those things, and that outcome of creative outcome can actually change, whether it becomes more cynical or whatever, but it definitely can impact you in a certain way if you don't have that life balance. And yeah, so there's that definitely. A lot of people don't think, I love filmmaking, that's all I'm going to do 24/7, but you leave behind some of that, and you maybe become less sensitive to, especially if you're doing documentary type of work where that's really important to, be in touch with what you're doing and your subject. So yeah, I definitely think it's a tricky one, but it's good to hear that, at least you have an opportunity to be able to do that. So one of the other things I'd like to know, is there something that either a mantra or a philosophy or a piece of gear that you have that's always with you?
I mean, in terms of a philosophy of shooting, just trying to be present and trying to always keeping an open mind to the possibilities of, you go into any shoot trying to be prepared as possible and just and having an idea of what's going to happen. But if you're too prepared and you're too narrow focused on your objective, you will walk past, possibly the story, a better story is lurking there. That so I think trying to be really open to seeing the story and listening, being a good listener is really, really important. And you've got to remind yourself all the time, because it's really easy to say those words, but really enacting it is another thing. But if you're working with a team, I think if everyone's on that same page and knows that philosophy, then it might be either one of you that reminds the other that, hey, this is good. There's more that we can delve here. More we can find out, and being truthful to things as much as possible, good or bad. So that's probably the most important thing as a documentary filmmaker is being curious and open-minded and questioning and not too stuck in a paradigm all the time. And I think there's the other thing is just staying connected to family while you're away. Just not getting so consumed that you don't. The great thing is we've got Skype and FaceTime and all those things now, that there's no excuse for being off the grid. And even if you're going to Antarctica, you can get satellite dongles now for your phone. So at least you can SMS anywhere on the planet. There's nowhere off the grid anymore, and that's definitely worth investing in for people. So yeah, I think those things, and like I said before, I think I'm a little bit less obsessed with the shot anymore, because I realise that a film isn't just one shot that you get, and you can't come at any cost to the crew, safety, impact on the local environment and people. Whereas, when I think you're starting out, trying to prove yourself maybe more so that, there's probably more desperation to get the shot because it's, without that you feel like you can't progress. And I think later on you learn that, if you're in it for the long haul, you'll get plenty of opportunities for the shot. And I know I've had many times early on that I was, terribly upset for missing something or being there too late, a day early or late or whatever. And that's, I think I'm very lucky that I've got the opportunity to go back to places and again. And they're the things I think you take with you more than anything, because if you've got those as part of your methodology, it doesn't matter what camera you've got, you'll always stay true to that. And gear-wise, I think my 50 to 1000 millimeter lens is, and my drone, those two would be things I love the most. Although I don't take the big lens everywhere because it's not always appropriate, but certainly for wildlife, that's definitely been such a game changer for me. So, I think, but of course, it comes back to my advice for people would be keep learning and reading stories and reading books and widening your net of where you get stories from and inspiration. And it's not all going to come from Instagram, scrolling. You've got to really get out there and find stories that are really interesting. And one bit of advice I always love is that if you love something truly, there's going to be so many other people who love it as well. And it might not be for everyone, but there's going to be plenty of other people in the world that think similarly. And if you find a story really fascinating, it will resonate with other people, no matter how niche or unusual it is. So that's something I always keep in mind. If I find it really amazing and interesting, then I know other people will as well. And then taking risks, I think, is also super important. Calculated risk, but when you feel something's worth it, don't just be driven by the monetary. Risk can be just risking your time, taking time on something. Not everything will pay off, but the ones that will progress you forward.
And have you got anything else you want to add?
Got a new website that launched last week, which I'm pretty excited about. untitledfilmworks.com.au, which we put some of our latest projects and some behind the scenes material and stories. And one thing I also advise people to put your best work forward. Don't put everything you've ever shot up. The work that you're most proud of that represents what you want to, who you are or where you want to go, and if it is one clip and if that's what you feel that is represents who you are, what you want to say and how you want to be perceived, then just have one clip up. Don't have 100. People have also short attention spans. They're probably going to only watch one or two things. So put those front and center. So our site has, Big Cat Tales. It has Tales by Light. It has Ghosts of the Arctic. It's got 2 or 3 other projects yet to come that are waiting in draft mode as soon as we can share them. And that's it. It's got those projects because that's really, what we want to be known for right now. So I think that's love any feedback if people have it on the new site, and we'll be adding to it as we can.
It's been wonderful him sharing all the interesting things about the world of documentary, wildlife documentary, and that style of documentary filmmaking. So I really wish you all the best.
Thank you, Pete. It's been a pleasure, and love to do it again sometime.
Will do. Thanks very much. So that was a great chat with Abe. And next week we have Harry Frith, who is a DOP working in LA. So that will be an interesting story to hear his sort of perspective working there. He has a wide range of experience from doing television shows and feature films and documentaries. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and look forward to sharing with you in 2 weeks.